Have you ever walked past someone and never guessed the life they've truly lived? What if the janitor you see every night was once a world-class linguist, fluent in 10 languages, trained in diplomacy, and forgotten by time? This is the remarkable story of Ruth Carter, a 61-year-old widow who quietly scrubbed office floors for 14 years, until the day a chance encounter revealed the brilliance she'd been carrying all along. What happened next didn't just change her life, it changed the entire company. If you believe in second chances, hidden potential, and the quiet strength of those who never gave up, this story is for you. Before we begin, please like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful, true life stories. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Let's get into it. Every night at 10 o'clock sharp, the glass doors of Valemore Logistics clicked open with a faint hiss, and Ruth Carter stepped into the gleaming marble lobby with her mop, her cart, and a silence that could calm a storm. No one paid her much attention. That's how it had always been. Not because she was rude to most, she was just the night lady, the one who wiped down the coffee machines, emptied trash cans in C-suite offices, and vacuumed floors that no one would walk again until morning. Her blue uniform bore no name tag, and her silver-streaked hair was always tied neatly under a faded scarf. She kept to herself, clocked in on time, and disappeared before sunrise like fog lifting. But Ruth Carter wasn't just a janitor. Not she was 61 years old, a widow and a mother who had once dreamed of opening a language institute overseas. Long before the scent of lemon cleaner clung to her hands, she had walked university halls in Morocco and Prague, lectured on comparative linguistics in Tokyo, and translated live at high-stakes diplomatic meetings in Geneva. Her passport once told stories that made interns stare in awe. Her voice had spoken treaties into motion. That was before everything changed. Her husband, Calvin, had been a high school football coach back in Ohio. Solid, kind-hearted, the kind of man who always warmed his hands before touching hers in the winter. One ordinary Saturday morning, he collapsed in the garden, a massive heart attack taking him before the paramedics even made it up the driveway. 3 months later, their only son, Marcus, was hit by a drunk driver on his way home from college. He survived, but barely. The spinal injury left him partially paralyzed, and the medical bills came faster than prayers could be answered. Ruth didn't have the luxury of grief. Her university contracts couldn't wait for healing, so she gave up everything, left the conference circuits, returned home, took a night job that let her care for Marcus by day, and for the next 14 years she scrubbed floors and folded pain into muscle memory. Seattle was never part of the plan, but Valemore Logistics had benefits, and the building stayed warm during the long winters. That was enough. She pushed the mop like a soldier on duty, calm and focused. Not a complaint, not a sound. She watched executives come and go, interns get promoted, names engraved on plaques. But no one ever asked about her story. They didn't know she spoke 10 languages, didn't know she once stood at a UN podium translating for diplomats whose decisions could shift borders. Didn't know that when the lights dimmed and she worked alone, she whispered old poems in Portuguese just to keep her memory sharp. She had once been extraordinary. But in this world, if you aren't wearing a title or sitting behind a desk, people don't ask what you know. They just step around you. And Ruth let them, not out of shame, out of choice, because the world had taken so much from her already, and what remained, her dignity, her knowledge, her quiet strength, she carried like a pearl deep in her pocket. No need to show it off, no need to explain. She did her work. She stayed invisible, until one day, someone finally looked. And that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, the kind where the sky couldn't quite decide between drizzle or fog. The marble lobby of Valemore Logistics buzzed with the usual rhythm, heels tapping, key cards beeping, coffee lids snapping into place. Just past 8:10 a.m., a wave of international guests arrived for the quarterly vendor summit. There were suitcases, heavy accents, confused glances toward touchscreen directories, and that familiar panic of being in the right building but the wrong language. Ruth Carter had just finished polishing the elevator chrome when she noticed a man in a dark gray windbreaker pacing near the security desk. He was holding a printed email with floor numbers and codes circled in red. His eyes darted from the schedule to the elevator panel, back to the schedule, then toward the hallway with growing frustration. Ruth didn't hesitate. She stepped forward gently, her voice calm and clear.
Здравствуйте. Вы потерялись?
Startled, the man looked up. Yes, Russian. You speak Russian?
Да. Пойдемте, я покажу вам нужный лифт.
She pointed and walked beside him, explaining how the access system worked, when the elevators changed zones, and how to check in upstairs. Across the lobby, Adam Whitaker, 38, CEO of Valemore Logistics, had just stepped in from the parking garage. He was halfway through his first sip of black coffee when he heard the Russian. It wasn't just that someone was speaking it, it was how they spoke. Native, confident, effortless. He looked up, and what he saw stopped him cold. It wasn't one of the international reps. It wasn't his new junior exec from the Moscow office. It was the janitor. That same woman he'd passed a dozen times on late nights, quietly wiping down conference tables or pushing a cart through the break room. She was gesturing calmly as she spoke, not rushed or nervous, just at ease, like she'd done it her whole life. Adam slowed his pace. Before he could reach her, 2 more moments happened in quick succession that made him set down his coffee on a nearby table. A group of Japanese business consultants stepped out of the elevator bank, visibly confused and discussing which floor their meeting was on. Ruth, still mid-conversation with the Russian engineer, turned her head, nodded politely, and switched languages without skipping a beat.
おはようございます。あなたたちは14階の会議に出席するのですか?
They lit up, relieved, surprised, and she guided them with calm instructions. Adam blinked. Then, just as he stepped forward, a third guest, this time from the French delegation, stopped her with a flustered expression and a question about mislabeled sample crates. Ruth turned again, her tone shifting, her cadence reshaping itself, and answered in flawless French. By now, Adam had stopped walking entirely. He wasn't just impressed, he was stunned. 3 conversations, 3 languages, 1 woman, and she hadn't missed a beat. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like that be mopping floors? How had this gone unnoticed? He moved closer, careful not to interrupt. The French guest laughed softly, nodded, and thanked her. The Japanese consultants bowed slightly. The Russian engineer turned with a grateful smile. And Ruth? She just gave a quiet nod, turned back toward her cart, and reached for her gloves like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Adam cleared his throat gently. Excuse me, ma'am? Ruth looked up, her expression open but guarded, like someone used to being approached with questions about spills or supplies. When she saw his face, she straightened slightly. Yes, sir? Adam paused, studying her. That was Russian, right? Yes, sir. And Japanese? Yes. French too? Yes. He hesitated. Do you speak all 3 fluently? I do, she replied. Her voice wasn't boastful, just honest, solid as a brick wall. Adam gave a faint smile. I'm Adam Whitaker, CEO. I know who you are, sir. I'd like to speak with you in my office if you're available. Ruth glanced at her gloves, then back at him. There was no fear in her face, but there was caution. Not the kind that comes from guilt, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being underestimated. She gave a small nod. All right. Adam gestured toward the elevator. This way. He pressed the button and held the door open as she stepped in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city rose behind the glass as the elevator climbed. Adam glanced at her from the corner of his eye, still trying to fit the pieces together. In a building full of college-educated professionals, international consultants, and polished executives, the most linguistically capable person had been wiping down baseboards less than 2 floors below his own office. He had no idea what her story was, but he was going to find out. Adam Whitaker's office was made of clean lines and quiet power. The walls of glass overlooked the Seattle skyline, with the harbor stretching beyond the high-rises like a gray ribbon. A framed map of Valemore's international offices hung behind his desk, dotted with color-coded pins. Ruth Carter sat in the guest chair across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture straight, eyes alert, not nervous, just prepared. Adam leaned forward, elbows on his desk. Ruth, I have to admit, I wasn't expecting to have this conversation today, or ever, frankly. Ruth offered a polite, measured nod. Most people don't, he smiled faintly. I just watched you speak 3 languages with perfect fluency in the span of 5 minutes. That's not something I see often, and certainly not something I expect from, well, he stopped himself, but the implication was already there. From a janitor, Ruth finished for him, voice calm, not offended, just honest. Adam exhaled, humbled. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'd like to understand, if you're willing. There was a beat of silence. Ruth looked toward the window. Her reflection was faint in the glass, a woman shaped by time, by grief, by choices no resume would ever show. You got time for the truth? She asked softly. I wouldn't have asked otherwise. She took a breath, slow and steady, like she was peeling something open that had been sealed a long time. I was born in Shaker Heights, Ohio, only child. My father worked at the Ford plant for 32 years. My mother taught piano lessons out of our kitchen. We didn't have much, but we had structure. We had books, and we had rules, education being rule number 1. Adam nodded quietly. I was good with language early on. Picked up Spanish in grade school, French by high school, got a full ride to Oberlin College, majored in linguistics, then went on to get my master's at Georgetown. Landed my first teaching contract overseas before I was 28. I worked with the State Department, embassy assignments, interpreter work, even training sessions with NATO liaisons in Berlin. Adam blinked. You were with the government? I was with people who believed in connection, she said, voice growing firmer. Words can save lives, Mr. Whitaker. They can also destroy them if they're misunderstood. He didn't interrupt. I met Calvin while stationed in Ankara. He was teaching high school history to the children of diplomats. He had this way of listening that made you forget the rest of the world. We got married on a balcony overlooking the Bosphorus. Had our son, Marcus, 2 years later. Moved back to the States when my father got sick. A shadow flickered across her face. Calvin passed away from a heart attack in our backyard. No warning. One moment he was pulling weeds. The next, he was just gone. Adam sat back, the weight of her words pressing into the room. Marcus was 17, sharp as a tack, had a full scholarship lined up for Purdue. Then one night, a drunk driver clipped him on his motorcycle just outside Akron. He survived, but the spinal damage changed everything. My son went from a varsity athlete to a wheelchair in 6 hours. She stopped, swallowed. I left my position at the consulate, stopped traveling. The insurance didn't cover half of what we needed. So I took a job at a grocery store, then a laundry service. Then when Marcus stabilized, I found night work here. Cleaning let me be home during the day to help him. Cook, bathe, do therapy appointments. It was steady, and it paid just enough. Adam was silent. It was the kind of story you didn't interrupt with business jargon or executive empathy. I didn't stop learning, Ruth added quietly now. Languages kept me sane. I borrowed grammar books from the public library, downloaded foreign news podcasts, kept flashcards in my pocket when I cleaned the boardroom. It was the only part of me that still felt alive. She looked him square in the eye. I'm not a failure, Mr. Whitaker. I just chose survival over recognition. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth, plain and unvarnished, the kind of truth that settles deep into your bones. Adam leaned back, his throat tight. Ruth, I'm sorry no one asked you about any of this before. She offered a small smile. Most folks don't look past the gloves and mop. He nodded, then softly, they should have. The following day passed with little fanfare. Ruth returned to her routine, quiet, methodical, invisible. She didn't expect anything to change. Adam had listened, sure, but life had taught her not to expect miracles after a single conversation. People meant well, but the system ran on habit, and habit rarely made space for janitors at boardroom tables. But at 2:47 p.m., everything shifted again. Ruth was restocking paper towels on the 5th floor when her work phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize, direct from the executive suite. Ms. Carter? Adam's voice came through, tight, urgent. I need a favor. It's important. Ruth paused, already sensing something had gone wrong. Yes, sir. We've got a group from our Shanghai office here for contract finalization. Their translator just collapsed. Medical emergency. Paramedics are on the way, but the meeting can't wait. Legal's here. Operations, finance, everyone. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. Ruth didn't hesitate. I'll be right there. She didn't stop to change. She didn't have time. She wiped her hands, straightened the collar of her janitor's uniform, and walked swiftly toward the elevators. Her sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished floors, but she moved with purpose, head high, heart steady. When she stepped into conference room 8C, time seemed to pause. A dozen executives sat around the long oak table, flanked by monitors, legal binders, and catering trays. At the far end, 5 visitors from Shanghai looked visibly tense, phones in hand, murmuring in Mandarin as they gestured toward the contract documents. When Ruth entered, the room collectively blinked. A few heads tilted. One manager actually started to rise, assuming she was there to clear dishes. Adam stood up quickly. Everyone, this is Ruth Carter. She'll be assisting with interpretation. For a moment, no one spoke. Ruth walked to the head of the table, met the eyes of the Shanghai team, and offered a slight bow, a gesture of respect. Then she addressed them, not in stilted phrases or textbook grammar, but in smooth, confident Mandarin.
对不起，打扰了。我们听说你们的翻译出了点状况，我来帮忙。
Sorry for the interruption. We heard your translator had a health issue. I'm here to assist. There was a beat of silence. Then one of the Chinese executives smiled, visibly relaxing.
您的中文说得很好。
Your Chinese is excellent, Ruth nodded, switching seamlessly into business vocabulary as she explained the clauses, clarified a cultural misinterpretation in one section, and gently corrected a term in the translated agreement that had been causing tension. As she spoke, the temperature in the room shifted. Stiff shoulders lowered. Pens began moving. People started nodding, smiling. At one point, one of the visiting execs made a lighthearted joke about American coffee being more like tea, and Ruth responded in Mandarin with a comeback that made them all chuckle. In 10 minutes, Ruth had done what an entire department had failed to do in 6 months. Build trust. From the corner of the room, Adam watched in awe. This wasn't just translation. This was diplomacy. This was art. The meeting lasted another 25 minutes. By the end of it, the lead negotiator from Shanghai stood up, clapped his hands together, and said in English, "We are satisfied. We sign." There was a light applause, and just like that, the deal was done. But what Ruth didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone from IT, tasked with setting up the Zoom call for the meeting, had recorded the entire session for company archiving. And by the next morning, a 30-second clip had found its way onto Valemore's internal communications portal. It wasn't the whole meeting, just a brief moment. Ruth, in her janitor's uniform, standing at the head of the table, smiling gently as she translated a joke that made the room laugh. No captions, no fancy edit, just truth. And it went viral, inside the company. By noon, employees across departments were whispering, "Did you see that video? Is that the janitor? No way that's real." But it was. In one clip, Ruth Carter had shattered the company's unspoken hierarchy. She'd spoken fluently in the language of global leadership while still wearing her work gloves. And for the first time in 14 years, people saw her. Really saw her. The week after the Shanghai meeting felt surreal. Ruth Carter's name, once invisible in the building directory, was now being spoken in every hallway. Adam Whitaker didn't wait for approval from HR or the board. He created a new title, Director of Cultural Liaison and Global Communications, and offered it to Ruth that same Friday. At first, she didn't believe him. "Sir, I don't have a degree in management," she said quietly in his office, still in her uniform. "I've never even had a business card." Adam smiled. "You don't need a card to prove what you already are." She accepted the position the next morning, reluctantly, cautiously, but with a quiet fire that had been sleeping inside her for too long. By Monday, a sleek new nameplate appeared outside a freshly painted corner office on the 12th floor. Ruth Carter, Director, Cultural Liaison, Global Communications. It was small, elegant, brushed steel, but it made waves like a stone in the still water, and not everyone was clapping. The tension came quietly at first, side glances in the elevator, awkward silence in the break room, emails sent without her name included in threads she should have been on. Then came the questions whispered behind glass doors. Did she even go to college? She was cleaning toilets a week ago. This is some PR stunt. Has to be. The sharpest resistance came from Karen Landry, a longtime executive in marketing and international strategy. Karen had spent 20 years climbing the ranks, one promotion, one project, one strategic plan at a time. She held an MBA, 5 certifications, and a deep sense of what she believed leadership was supposed to look like. To her, Ruth's appointment felt like a personal insult. And Karen didn't just grumble, she moved. She gathered signatures, mostly from department heads and senior managers, under the guise of preserving standards of leadership. The petition questioned Ruth's qualifications, citing her lack of formal corporate experience, absence of an advanced degree, and non-traditional background. The document was carefully worded, no direct attacks, no mention of janitor, but every sentence dripped with condescension. By Thursday, the matter had reached the board of directors. Ruth received a formal notice that she'd been requested to attend a closed-door review session. No agenda listed, just a time, 10 a.m. sharp, 17th floor, conference room C. That morning, she dressed in a charcoal gray blazer borrowed from her church friend and a pair of slacks she'd bought 10 years ago for a parent-teacher meeting. No heels, just the same black walking shoes she always wore. As she stepped off the elevator, eyes followed her, some sympathetic, some cold. She entered the boardroom to find 9 directors seated around a long mahogany table. Karen Landry sat near the end, back straight, face unreadable. A thick packet of printed materials lay in front of each chair. Ruth knew what was inside. Chairman Leonard Pace, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a neutral tone, began without small talk. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. There have been some concerns raised regarding the process and qualifications behind your recent appointment. This session is to provide clarity for everyone. Ruth didn't flinch. She took the empty seat and folded her hands on the table. Karen spoke first. This is not personal, Ms. Carter, but this company has protocols. We value credentials, proven track records. We can't base appointments on charisma or a one-time event. Ruth looked at her calmly. Is that what you think happened? Karen didn't answer. Another board member leaned forward. Can you explain why you believe you're qualified for this role? Ruth inhaled deeply and began, not with defense, but with story. She spoke of 30 years immersed in international cultures, of embassy halls where she translated between world leaders, of the linguistic precision required to navigate legal contracts across languages, and the diplomacy required to de-escalate cultural misunderstandings. She shared how she'd studied alone for 14 years, not to impress, but to survive. I've already saved this company from a misfiled contract that would have cost $1.2 million, she added. I helped close a deal with our Chinese partners that had stalled for 6 months. I didn't ask for a title. I was given an opportunity, and I delivered. She let the words settle before she continued. I'm not here to compete with resumes. I'm here to connect people who speak different languages, on paper and in spirit. You don't have to like how I got here. You just need to ask yourself, are we better off because I'm here? Silence filled the room. Karen shifted in her chair. Chairman Pace cleared his throat. Thank you, Ms. Carter. That will be all for now. Ruth stood, nodded once, and walked out, her back straight, her steps firm. She didn't know what they'd decide, but she hadn't come to beg. She came to be heard. The boardroom doors closed behind Ruth with a firm click. She walked back to her new office on the 12th floor, not knowing what the outcome would be, but knowing she'd said what needed to be said. She hadn't begged. She hadn't justified. She had simply told the truth, And sometimes that was the most radical act of all. The rest of the day passed like a slow tide. No word from upstairs, no decision announced. But something had shifted. By the next morning, the shift became a tide. It started with a quiet email, forwarded from the legal team to Adam Whitaker, then copied to 2 VPs. It was a report, a clean, black and white audit of contract translation discrepancies uncovered by Ruth during her first week in the liaison role. There in plain text was a number, $2.3 million. That was the amount Ruth had saved the company in one afternoon by correcting a flawed French to English translation in a shipping agreement with a major European partner. The original contract contained a single word, livraison, mistranslated as gift delivery instead of freight shipment. That error, unnoticed for almost a year, had resulted in customs delays, legal threats, and additional storage fees in 3 countries. Ruth had spotted it while reviewing onboarding materials. She fixed it in 10 minutes. The second wave hit before lunch. The Dubai regional office, which hadn't responded to Valemore's inquiries in nearly 6 months, suddenly replied with a personal thank you note. The regional director wrote, "For the first time, your company acknowledged the significance of it in our calendar when rescheduling shipment negotiations. Whoever provided this cultural note, thank them. It made all the difference." That note had been a single line Ruth added to an internal memo. Avoid sending documents requiring signatures during the Eid holiday window, April 9th to 13th. Prior delays were partially due to misaligned timelines and perceived insensitivity. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't grand, but it reopened a door that had been shut tight for over half a year. And then came the third, most unexpected ripple, this one straight from the Berlin office. An email marked urgent arrived in the inbox of Valemore's head of diplomacy and foreign partnerships. Attached were 3 flagged errors from previous diplomatic correspondence with a German regulatory agency. The emails, written by a Valemore rep who had used Google Translate for speed, contained phrases that, in German, carried unintended meanings. One used the term "Übertragen Sie das Eigentum jetzt sofort," which translated roughly to "transfer the ownership immediately, now." To a German bureaucrat, it sounded pushy, even threatening. Another had mistakenly referred to a female executive as Herr Director. And a third had mistranslated pending legal review as legal oversight, implying negligence. Ruth had caught all 3 and provided corrected phrasing, by hand, in fluent, regionally appropriate German. The head of German operations responded with a handwritten note scanned and attached. "Your new liaison speaks with precision and respect. A welcome change." By 2 p.m., Adam walked straight into the boardroom on the 17th floor holding a folder thicker than the original petition. Without raising his voice, he laid down the results. He detailed the savings, the reopened partnerships, the diplomatic salvages. Then he closed the folder and said one sentence that silenced the room. "This is what competence looks like." Karen Landry didn't speak. Chairman Leonard Pace adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "It's clear we have more to learn from Miss Carter than we assumed." By 4 p.m., Ruth was formally confirmed in her new role. The board's decision came without press, without fanfare, just a short internal memo stating the review had been completed and Director Ruth Carter's appointment would stand, effective immediately. No apologies. But Ruth didn't need them. That evening, Adam stopped by her office, where she was reviewing a language training proposal for onboarding staff. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You turned that boardroom inside out," he said with a grin. Ruth didn't look up from her notes. "I didn't say anything special," she replied. "I just told the truth." "You didn't just tell it," he said. "You owned it." She looked up, smiled faintly. "That's the difference, isn't it?" The morning after the board's decision, Ruth arrived at work just before 7 a.m. The air was crisp. The sky was streaked with gray and gold. She walked through the lobby not as a shadow, not as someone to be looked past, but as a woman people now looked toward. There were nods, smiles, even a few claps from overnight staff finishing their shift. But Ruth didn't carry herself like a woman who had just won something. She carried herself like someone who had survived something. That week, the company made a quiet but bold move. The large training room on the 14th floor, where new hires were onboarded, where managers gathered for leadership workshops, got a new nameplate. The brushed metal letters gleamed beneath the overhead lights. The Ruth Carter Room. Where potential is measured by action, not appearance. There was no ceremony, no press release, but the message traveled farther than any headline ever could. In cubicles and conference rooms, Ruth's name was spoken with reverence, and not just because she spoke 10 languages or saved the company millions. It was because she had proven that intelligence has no uniform and dignity needs no degree. Even the most cynical employees, those who'd once doubted or whispered, couldn't deny it anymore. The numbers were there. The emails from Dubai and Berlin were there. And the respect Ruth carried, that was earned the hard way. But perhaps the most remarkable thing wasn't Ruth's promotion. It was what happened next. Because when someone steps out of the shadows, they make space for others to follow. 3 weeks after her confirmation, a quiet ripple turned into a wave. Stories began surfacing, not in official memos, but over coffee, in late-night Slack threads, whispered in hallways. A woman in shipping who'd studied architecture in Syria before fleeing with her children. A cafeteria worker who once managed a textile factory in Ghana. An older IT support tech who wrote 5 novels under a pen name but never spoke of it. And then there was Luis Rivera, the night shift security guard at the rear entrance of the building. He was 47, soft-spoken, always polite. Most knew him as Lou, the guy who handed out parking passes and refilled the vending machine change trays. But no one had ever asked about the thick engineering book he always read during his lunch breaks, until Ruth did. She passed by one night, paused, and asked gently, "You studying something?" He looked up, surprised. "Just keeping my mind sharp." "You're reading thermodynamic systems in Spanish." He smiled. "Used to be a mechanical engineer in Honduras. Factory shut down. Came here after things got rough." Ruth nodded slowly. "Ever think about going back into the field?" He laughed. "No papers, no license here, just memories." Ruth didn't lecture. She didn't push. She simply said, "Come see me tomorrow. I want to show you something." 2 weeks later, with Ruth's help, Luis was sitting in a training session in the Ruth Carter Room as part of a new internal advancement initiative Adam and Ruth co-developed called the Inside Voice Project. The program was simple: identify untapped talent from within, provide pathways, offer mentorship, and most importantly, listen before judging. Ruth didn't just change titles, she changed culture. One afternoon, Adam stopped by her office. He leaned in the doorway, watching her sort through a stack of translated documents for an upcoming Japan-US expansion proposal. "You know," he said, "when I first asked you for help, I thought it would be a one-time favor." Ruth didn't look up. "Most good things start that way," he chuckled. "We're naming the whole leadership series after you next quarter. Hope you're okay with that." She raised an eyebrow. "As long as you don't put my picture on a coffee mug." He grinned. "Noted." She paused, then added softly, "Do you know what it means to have a room named after you, in a place where no one used to say your name?" Adam didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ruth turned back to her papers. The work continued, but everything had changed, not because someone gave her power, but because someone finally recognized it. Ruth Carter's story is more than a tale of a janitor becoming an executive. It's a reminder that wisdom doesn't vanish when we grow older. It deepens. That our greatest strengths often come not from titles or degrees, but from experience, compassion, and perseverance. For over a decade, Ruth swept floors in silence, all while carrying the knowledge of 10 languages, a lifetime of diplomacy, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving heartbreak. She never stopped learning. She never stopped listening. And when the moment came, she didn't need anyone's permission to shine. Her journey teaches us that your value doesn't diminish just because the world forgets to see it. The world may overlook you because of your age, your uniform, or your job title. But that doesn't mean you aren't extraordinary. Like Ruth, many of us have stories, skills, and wisdom forged through years of sacrifice and love. things that no resume can measure. And perhaps the most powerful message of all, it's never too late to be recognized. Whether you're 61 or 81, you still have something to give. Your story still matters. And one moment of courage, just one, can open doors not just for yourself, but for others coming behind you. So if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or told your time has passed, take heart. The right people will see you. And when they do, don't be afraid to take your seat at the table and pull up a few more chairs for others like you. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure to click the notification bell so you don't miss the next inspiring chapter. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories. We shine a light on lives that deserve to be seen. Your voice still matters. Let's keep telling stories that prove it.